They threw me out on Christmas night, my father's voice echoing like a curse. "You're a disgrace. Get out!" I stumbled into the snow, the warmth of laughter still burning behind the closed door. All my life, I had been the forgotten one, overshadowed by my brother, silenced by my mother's excuses. But that night, as tears blurred the streetlights, something shifted. The next morning, an email arrived. My family's $120 million merger proposal begging for approval. They had no idea I was the CEO they were pleading with. They thought I was broken. They were wrong. Christmas night always carried a cruel irony in my family. The house gleamed with strings of gold lights curling across the stone pillars, the Carter crest embossed on the double doors as though it were some royal seal. Inside, crystal chandeliers spilled light onto polished mahogany floors. Every corner boasted wealth and legacy, yet every reflection in those mirrors reminded me of how little I belonged here. The dining table stretched the length of the hall, a cathedral of glassware and silver cutlery. My father, Richard, sat at the head, his posture regal, his voice heavy with the authority that had shaped our lives. Beside him was my mother, Linda, the picture of elegance, her smile painted on like porcelain, delicate but hollow. And next to her, basking in every ounce of attention, was my older brother Michael, the golden child, the heir, the man they praised as if his existence alone sustained the family's empire. I sat near the end, where the chandelier's light dimmed and conversation never reached. My chair was a fraction apart from the others, as though someone had nudged it just enough to remind me of my place. I tried to laugh when they laughed, tried to sip the expensive wine without trembling, but I could already feel the edges of exclusion cutting into me. Michael raised his glass, his voice booming across the table. "To the Carter legacy," he declared, "and to the deal that will take us into the future. A $120 million merger, finalized within weeks." Cheers erupted, forks clinked against crystal. My father's face glowed with pride as he looked at his son, not even glancing my way. My mother leaned toward me, whispering softly, "Smile, Emily. This is a celebration." Her words were kind on the surface, but the undertone was unmistakable. "Don't ruin this. Don't draw attention. Stay invisible." Michael's eyes flicked to me. "Oh, and Emily," he said with a smirk. "I hear consulting pays. Well, in pennies. Don't worry, though. Maybe when this deal is done, I'll toss you a real job." The table roared with laughter, my father's booming chuckle rising above the rest. My hands tightened around my glass. I told myself to breathe, to ignore it. But then, Michael reached under the table, pulling out his phone. "Actually, let's remind everyone of Emily's great accomplishments." With a swipe, he projected an old text thread on the dining room screen. My words from years ago, when I'd confided in him about struggling at work, about feeling invisible. "There's our consultant," he grinned, crying about how no one takes her seriously. The laughter returned, sharper this time, carving me open with every echo. I turned to my mother, my last fragile hope. "Mom!" Her eyes darted to my father, then back to her plate. "He's just joking, darling. You're too sensitive." The ground beneath me tilted. I felt 12 years old again, standing in the rain outside while Michael was wrapped in blankets inside. I felt 16, listening to my father boast about his son's scholarship while my own achievements were brushed aside. I felt every moment I had swallowed pain to keep the peace. Then it came. My father slammed his glass down, wine spilling across the tablecloth. His voice cracked like thunder. "You're a disgrace, Emily. Get out." The room fell silent, save for the sound of Michael's phone recording. I rose slowly, every eye watching as though I were the evening's entertainment. My throat burned, but no words came. I walked past the glittering tree, past the glowing fire, out into the icy night. Snowflakes stung my cheeks as the door slammed behind me. I stood in the driveway, breath fogging in the air, while muffled laughter seeped through the walls. The chill crept into my bones, yet the shame burned hotter than any winter wind. My car keys shook in my hands as I climbed inside, staring at the house that had always felt more like a prison than a home. For a long time, I couldn't drive. I just sat there, listening to the faint echo of their cheer, the sound of belonging that had never included me. My phone buzzed with a new notification. A message from my mother. "Don't take it so hard. It was only a joke." A joke. That was all I had ever been to them. I started the engine, the headlights cutting across the snow. As I drove away, the house shrank in the rearview mirror, a golden cage fading into the darkness. My chest ached, my hands clenched the wheel, but in the hollow of that despair, something stirred. The laughter that had crushed me now fueled something else, an ember buried deep, refusing to die. I didn't know it yet, but this night would mark the end of the Emily they could humiliate, discard, erase. Something was shifting, a quiet tremor beneath the weight of years. They thought they had broken me. They had only awakened me. The snow had barely melted from my windshield when the echo of my father's words still clung to me. "You're a disgrace. Get out." That night should have ended it, but humiliation has a way of spreading like poison, seeping into every crack of memory until it corrodes what's left of your dignity. The next morning, as I sipped coffee in the small apartment I called home, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Notifications flashed across the screen, mentions, tags, cruel comments. My brother's video had made its way online. The clip of me standing, frozen and silent, as my father banished me from the table was now a public spectacle. The caption Michael had chosen, "The consultant nobody wanted at dinner." I scrolled through the comments, each one another knife twisting deeper. Pathetic. Why was she even there? Imagine being that unwanted by your own blood. My chest tightened. Strangers laughed at a pain I had carried since childhood. But the betrayal cut sharper when I saw the accounts commenting. Cousins, family friends, people who had smiled to my face at gatherings. They clicked the little like buttons, validating my brother's cruelty, ensuring the wound would never heal. I closed my eyes, my mother's message replaying in my mind. It was only a joke. No, it wasn't. A joke doesn't trend on the internet. A joke doesn't destroy reputations. A joke doesn't expose a lifetime of neglect in one merciless clip. I wanted to disappear. Yet, part of me wanted them to feel the sting they had unleashed. That afternoon, I drove past the Carter estate again, slower this time. From the road, I could see silhouettes moving inside, hear faint echoes of conversation through the walls. They were celebrating still, basking in the afterglow of the Christmas dinner, as though nothing had happened, as though casting me out had been as inconsequential as brushing crumbs off the table. Through the frosted glass, I glimpsed Michael laughing, raising his phone again. My father clapped him on the back like a proud coach cheering his star player. My mother poured another glass of wine, her face tilted away, a mask of compliance. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. The poison wasn't just spreading, it was consuming. I wasn't merely forgotten, I was being erased. Their unity thrived on my exclusion, their bond sealed by my exile. Later, I learned from a distant cousin's social media post that my name had become a running joke in the family. Pulling an Emily now meant being dramatic, sensitive, weak. They had turned my identity into a punchline, a warning to others of what not to be. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt every ounce of weight pressing down. Memories flickered like cruel home movies, being left outside during thunderstorms while Michael was comforted, my father dismissing my straight A grades as expected, my mother assuring me Michael just needed more attention. The cycle had been systematic, carefully designed to convince me that my worth was conditional, fragile, replaceable. The betrayal wasn't just from one night, it had been written into my bloodline. I was the scapegoat, the vessel for their frustrations, the sacrifice that kept their fragile image intact. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't comments, it was a message from Michael himself. "Don't be mad, sis. It's all in good fun. Besides, the video's giving me great PR before the merger. You should be grateful." Grateful. That word sat like ash on my tongue. He was using my pain as fuel for his triumph, and they all applauded. I typed a reply, my fingers shaking. You've always hated me. I hovered over send, then deleted it. Words wouldn't matter. They never had. Instead, I turned my phone off and sat in the dark, letting the silence wash over me. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in, but within that suffocating stillness, I felt something shift. The poison they fed me was making me sick, but it was also building an immunity. I could no longer deny what they were. My family had chosen their golden child, and I was nothing but collateral. Yet, deep inside, I began to wonder, what happens when the scapegoat no longer plays the role? What happens when the one discarded decides not to vanish, but to rise? I didn't have an answer yet. I only knew this. If they thought I would fade into silence, they didn't know me at all. And just as that thought settled, my phone buzzed one last time, despite being switched off minutes before. The screen lit with an incoming email notification. The sender's name froze me where I sat. Carter Enterprises. Subject line, confidential, merger proposal draft. The poison in my veins turned to fire. I sat frozen in the glow of my laptop, the words on the screen blurring together. Confidential, merger proposal draft. My family's empire, the one they had bragged about between sips of champagne, now begged for approval from the company I secretly commanded. But instead of triumph, what filled me was a suffocating ache. The email was just confirmation of what I had known all along. I had never been part of their plans. I was only ever in the room to remind them who they didn't want to be. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, the room dark but for the pulse of the streetlight outside, shadows stretching long across the ceiling. My mind replayed every slight, every wound, as though the night at dinner had ripped open a vault. I saw myself at 12, dripping wet from the rain because I'd been locked out for missing curfew while Michael was handed hot cocoa inside. I saw myself at 16, clutching an acceptance letter to a prestigious university, only to hear my father call it expected, while Michael's mediocre grades earned a celebration. I saw myself at 25, landing a promotion in silence while my brother's failed startup was salvaged with pride. It wasn't the merger proposal that broke me. It was the sudden clarity that there had never been a place for me at that table. Not at Christmas. Not ever. My phone vibrated against the nightstand. I turned it over, expecting another cruel comment or Michael's smug gloating. Instead, it was my mother. A single line of text glowed back at me. Don't be so dramatic. Last night was only a joke, my chest hollowed. A joke. That word had followed me like a curse. Every dismissal of my pain, wrapped up in 3 syllables. I dropped the phone back onto the nightstand, face down, as though I could smother it like a flame. The next day, I drove without purpose, the city streets winding beneath the gray winter sky. At a red light, I glanced at the billboard overhead. It was Carter Enterprises, a glossy ad with Michael's face plastered beside my father's. Building tomorrow together. The lie stared down at me, larger than life, a monument to everything I would never be invited to join. I pulled into a side street and parked. My chest felt like it was splitting open. I wanted to scream, but instead I let the silence consume me. For the first time, I allowed myself to accept what I had always avoided. My family had never loved me. Not truly, not unconditionally. Tears came hot and fast, blurring the cold windshield. My breaths grew shallow, and for a moment, I wondered if I even belonged anywhere in this world. I had built walls of achievement, created an identity of independence. Yet here I was, a woman undone by the absence of love in the only place she should have found it. The thought slithered in, uninvited but heavy. Maybe they were right. Maybe I am nothing. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The edges of the world felt sharp, dangerous. But then, as if the universe couldn't allow me to drown completely, a slip of paper caught my eye. Wedged in the visor above me was a Christmas card I had tucked away years ago. It wasn't from family. It was from Clara, my closest friend, written back when I had confessed feeling invisible. You are seen. You are worthy. And one day you'll know it too. My breathing steadied. A pause. a fragile reprieve in the storm. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt something other than despair. I felt remembered. I drove home, gripping that card as though it were a lifeline. The world was still cold, still hostile, but I carried one undeniable truth with me. I had been loved, even if not by the people whose approval I had chased all my life. Night fell heavy again, and I sat by the window of my apartment, the city's lights flickering in the distance. I opened my laptop, staring once more at the email from Carter Enterprises. My hands hovered over the keys. Should I open it? Should I delete it? I clicked. Pages of numbers and contracts filled the screen. Their empire laid bare, but I barely registered the details. All I saw was the signature block at the bottom. Michael Carter, Chief Financial Officer. My brother, the man who had laughed while I was pushed out into the snow. The man who had turned me into a family punchline. His name was inked over a deal that could either save or destroy them. The illusion shattered then. Every pretense of family, every scrap of loyalty, every flicker of hope, it all cracked apart like glass. There was no going back. I closed the laptop with shaking hands, my reflection staring back at me in the dark screen. Tears still streaked my face, but beneath them burned something new. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper, the faintest spark of clarity. My family had written me off as weak, dramatic, disposable, but they had just handed me the weapon that could rewrite everything. The cursor blinked at me, taunting. The merger proposal sprawled across the screen, a labyrinth of numbers, clauses, and signatures. At the bottom, Michael's name glared back like a brand. For hours, I stared at it, my chest tightening with a mix of fury and disbelief. Then, with a single exhale, the weight shifted. The truth was undeniable. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't a discarded consultant begging for scraps. I was the CEO of Titan Strategies. The company Carter Enterprises was now on its knees to impress. The realization crashed over me with terrifying clarity. For years, I had sat at their table, treated as a ghost. Now, without their knowledge, I was the one with the pen that could decide whether their empire lived or died. My grief cracked open, releasing something raw, something long suppressed. Rage, not the kind that consumed, but the kind that clarified, sharpened. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "You're a disgrace. Get out." And for once, I smiled. No, I thought. I am the key. I dove deeper into the proposal. The first pages were polished, glossy projections of growth and synergy. But as I traced the details, my pulse quickened. Buried in financial disclosures was a line item that didn't add up. I cross-checked, recalculated, and there it was. A $40 million debt hidden beneath subsidiary accounts. My brother had buried it, disguised as development expenses. If this merger went through, Titan would inherit the liability. Michael wasn't just arrogant, he was reckless, desperate. The rage inside me crystallized. They had laughed me out of their home, paraded me as a joke. Yet here was their heir, gambling with lies and expecting no one to see. A surge of resolve surged through my veins. They wanted to erase me. I would erase the illusion they built instead. By morning, I was in Titan's downtown office, high above the city where winter fog coiled around skyscrapers. My legal team assembled in the conference room, eyes scanning the documents I had forwarded at dawn. $40 million concealed under project expenditures, my lead counsel muttered, flipping through the spreadsheets. That's not just sloppy, that's fraud. I leaned forward, my palms flat against the table. And they're presenting it as leverage for growth. They think they can dump their failures on us. Not only is it dishonest, it's insulting. The room quieted. For a moment, I felt the eyes of my team, not as skeptics but as allies. These people didn't see me as the forgotten daughter. They saw me as the leader I had fought to become. We'll need evidence documented, every misstep cataloged, the council continued. If this goes public, Carter Enterprises' reputation could implode. I nodded slowly. That's the point. We don't strike them with fire. We let them light the match themselves. The strategy took shape piece by piece, a meeting, official and unavoidable, where the Carters would expect deference from an unknown CEO. They'd come confident, smug, ready to dictate terms. And then, in front of the very partners they sought to impress, the truth would bleed out. Not through my vengeance, but through their arrogance. That night, after the team dispersed, I remained in the office. The city's lights stretched endlessly below, a sea of possibility. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, the weight of it all bearing down. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I becoming like them? Using humiliation as a weapon, savoring the downfall instead of the justice? My reflection stared back, weary, uncertain. Am I turning into the enemy I hate? The thought twisted my stomach. I longed for my mother's arms, for the safety of belonging, for something other than war. But that dream had shattered long ago. I closed my eyes and breathed. No, this wasn't cruelty. This was truth. What they had buried for decades, I would drag into the light. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I refused to be silent any longer. When I opened my laptop again, my hands moved with certainty. I drafted a formal invitation on Titan letterhead, polished and professional. We look forward to discussing the merger proposal in detail. Please meet with Titan's CEO at our headquarters on January 5th. My fingers hesitated before typing the final line. Attendance required. I pictured my father's brows furrowed at the wording, Michael's grin faltering when he realized the stakes, my mother smoothing her dress nervously. They would walk into that room expecting power. They would find me instead. I hit send. The cursor blinked once more, but this time it no longer mocked me. It bowed. The conference room glowed with polished marble floors and a chandelier dripping with glass, every detail designed to project power. Titan's executives lined one side of the table, their suits sharp, their expressions controlled. On the opposite side, the Carters swept in as if they owned the place. My father, Richard, carried himself like a general walking into victory. Michael strutted at his side, his grin cocky, his phone in hand, ready to capture another triumph. My mother, Linda, trailed just behind, eyes down, the perfect picture of quiet compliance. They didn't see me at first. I had waited in the adjacent lounge, timing my entrance. I could hear their voices drifting into the room. "This will be easy," Michael said, his tone arrogant. "They'll fall over themselves to sign." "Of course they will," Richard replied. "Who wouldn't want to be tied to the Carter name?" When I stepped into the doorway, silence dropped like a stone. I wore a white suit, tailored and gleaming, each step deliberate on the polished floor. All eyes turned. My father blinked, my mother gasped softly, but it was Michael's face that betrayed everything. His jaw slackened, his voice cracked. "Emily?" I let the word hang in the air, savoring its weight. Then, without a smile, without hesitation, I walked to the head of the table. My chair. My place. I laid the folder down with a decisive thud. "Shall we begin?" The Titan executives leaned back, watching with careful neutrality. The Carters scrambled for composure, but their unease rippled across the table. Richard cleared his throat. "This is unexpected. What exactly is this?" I opened the folder, sliding a stack of papers across the glossy surface. "This," I said, "is your proposal. And these," I tapped the highlighted figures, "are the lies you tried to bury." Michael leaned forward, sweat already beading along his temple. "That's just standard accounting practice. Nothing unusual. $40 million disguised as project expenditures?" I tilted my head. Standard practice? Or fraud? The room stirred. Titan's legal counsel adjusted his glasses, flipping through the documents. A murmur spread among the board. Richard slammed his hand against the table. "Watch your tone. We are the Carters. Our name carries weight you cannot possibly—" "Your name," I interrupted, my voice calm but sharp as glass, "carries nothing but arrogance, and arrogance doesn't pay debts." The words sliced the air. My mother's hands trembled in her lap, though she kept her eyes down. Michael snapped, his composure cracking. "Don't act like you're better than us. You were nothing. You were a nobody sitting at our table." "Until you threw me out," I said evenly. "And now I am the one deciding if your empire survives." Gasps rippled from the other side of the table. Some executives scribbled notes, others exchanged glances. The power had shifted fully, visibly. I pressed on, methodical, exposing each inconsistency. Hidden subsidiaries, fabricated valuations, debts disguised as assets. With every revelation, Michael's face reddened, Richard's voice grew more desperate. My mother remained a silent statue, watching her carefully built facade unravel. "This is ridiculous," Richard roared. "Michael, tell them! Fix this!" Michael stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "This is your fault," he spat at his father. "You told me to hide it. You told me it was the only way." "You incompetent fool," Richard bellowed, slamming his fist again. "You ruined us." The explosion between them reverberated through the room. Every mask shattered. My family's perfect image crumbled in front of strangers, not because of my words alone, but because of their own rot, their own inability to hold together when stripped bare. It should have satisfied me, but in that moment, all I felt was a quiet sorrow. This was the truth I had lived all my life, now displayed for the world. Then came the final twist. One of Titan's senior board members, a man I knew had long admired my father's empire, pushed back his chair. "I once believed the Carters were untouchable," he said gravely. "But today I see the future lies with Titan, and with Emily Carter at its helm." Applause followed, not thunderous, but steady, deliberate, a seal of approval that carried more weight than any insult ever thrown at me. Richard's face drained of color. He looked at me then, eyes hard, voice trembling with rage. "You'll destroy this family. You'll burn it to the ground. You'll hurl the Carter name into ashes." I met his stare without flinching. He didn't see it, but everyone else did. They had already destroyed themselves. The fallout came swiftly, like an avalanche set loose by a single crack. Within days of the disastrous meeting, the press ran headlines that devoured the Carter name. "Carter Enterprises exposed in $40 million debt cover-up. Merger collapse leaves Carter Empire in ruins." Photographs of my father and brother splashed across newspapers, their once proud faces now etched with defeat. Investors fled. Partners pulled out. What had taken generations to build disintegrated in weeks. And I, the one they had cast aside, watched from a distance as the gilded cage finally collapsed under its own weight. At family gatherings I was no longer invited to, silence reigned. Cousins who once liked cruel posts about me now avoided speaking of Richard and Michael altogether. Old friends of the Carters distanced themselves, eager not to be tainted. The same voices that had once joined the chorus of mockery now whispered doubts, careful not to be caught defending the fallen dynasty. And yet there were others, quiet, hesitant voices, that surprised me. A younger cousin reached out through an email, admitting she had always felt smothered by the family's perfection act. "You showed me," she wrote, "that it's okay to break away." For the first time, I realized the collapse wasn't only destruction, it was revelation. Still, power doesn't surrender easily. One evening, as I was reviewing Titan's next quarter strategies in my apartment, the phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach clench. Martin Hale, attorney at law, Michael's lawyer. "Emily." His voice slid through the line, cautious but steady. "Your brother wants to talk, privately. He thinks there's a way you and he could work together. A mutual benefit." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. Michael, the brother who had laughed as I was thrown into the snow, now reached out with desperation disguised as diplomacy. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch until Martin cleared his throat nervously. "I'll think about it," I said at last, though my tone carried no promise. I hung up before he could press further. The cliffhanger of my life had shifted again, but this time I felt no urgency. I wasn't the desperate one anymore. In the weeks that followed, I chose not to engage. Instead, I poured myself into the life I had been quietly building all along. Titan grew stronger, my team tighter. The colleagues who had stood beside me became something more than co-workers. They became the family I had always searched for. They celebrated victories with me, listened when I faltered, and reminded me that loyalty need not come from blood. I began to speak too. At conferences, at small gatherings, eventually even on digital platforms, I told my story. Not of revenge, but of survival. I spoke of scapegoats and golden children, of gaslighting cloaked as love, of how family could wound more deeply than any stranger. And in the eyes of the people listening, I saw recognition. I saw healing. The irony was not lost on me. My family had spent years silencing me. Now, the very truth they tried to bury became the voice that reached others. One evening, I found myself walking through the city streets as Christmas lights blinked against fresh snow. The air was sharp, crisp, filled with laughter from strangers passing by. I wrapped my coat tighter, the crunch of snow beneath my boots strangely comforting. For once, the season didn't ache like a reminder of exclusion. For once, it felt like it belonged to me, too. I paused before a shop window where children pressed their noses against the glass, marveling at toys glittering inside. The reflection caught me. Older, yes. Scarred, yes. But standing tall, unbroken. I realized then that I didn't need to rewrite the Carter story. I had written my own. A soft smile curved my lips as snowflakes clung to my hair. I was free, not because I had destroyed them, but because I had refused to let them destroy me. As I walked on, the bells from a nearby church tolled, echoing into the night. And though the road ahead was uncertain, it no longer frightened me. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need their approval. I needed only this, the truth, my voice, and the strength to keep moving forward. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.